The forest has always been more than trees and soil. It is not simply a place where one walks, where one camps, or where one passes through to find beauty. It is older than that, deeper than that, and more silent than the mind can truly bear. People enter the woods believing they are stepping into nature, but they are stepping into a realm that does not answer to them. For every rustling branch there is a silence that swallows it. For every path carved by human boots there are roots and shadows that erase it again. Each year, hundreds vanish in forests across the world. They leave behind shoes, torn tents, extinguished fires, and in some cases nothing at all. Their voices never reach another ear. Their bodies never return to families. Search parties comb through undergrowth. Dogs sniff the earth, helicopters sweep the canopy, and yet the forest holds what it has taken. It is not unusual to discover bones decades later, bleached and scattered, as if the earth itself grew impatient and spat out the remnants of what it swallowed. Those who walk among the trees at night know that the silence of a forest is not empty. It is a silence that presses in, heavy and deliberate. It makes one aware of every footstep, every shallow breath. Eyes search the blackness between trunks, seeing forms that may not be there, and sometimes forms that are. In that silence, many hikers have claimed to hear the sound of footsteps behind them. Careful, measured, always just out of sight. When they stop, the sound stops. When they move again, it returns. No one is there when the light of a headlamp swings back. No one is there, and yet something follows. The human mind can only endure so much emptiness before it begins to invent. A shadow between branches becomes a figure. The sway of a tree becomes the nod of a head. But the question that grips those who have walked alone is not whether the mind is inventing. The question is whether the mind is trying to warn them. There are stories told quietly among rangers, passed between locals who live near the borders of wilderness. A tent found slashed from the inside as if the occupants clawed to get out. A campsite discovered with all belongings left behind but no trace of the hikers. Entire groups who vanished in weather too mild to kill. There are footprints that begin in the soil but do not end anywhere, simply ceasing mid-stride, as though the body attached to them had been lifted out of existence. The forest does not rush to explain itself. It never has. When people vanish there, the explanations offered by the living are always the same. A bear attack, a fall into a ravine, disorientation leading to starvation. Perhaps some of these are true, but not all. Some vanishances are so sudden, so clean, that even investigators cannot hold their conclusions with certainty. Families are told words to soothe them, but they feel the truth in their bones, that the forest has taken what it wanted. Imagine the stillness before dawn, a fog clinging low to the ground, the skeletal outlines of trees stretching endlessly in every direction. A lone hiker pushes forward, the crunch of boots against frost ringing in the silence. Then another sound joins, faint, dragging, matching pace. He turns, but the fog reveals only more trees. The sound halts. He breathes in, too sharply, too fast. The forest feels as if it is breathing with him, inhaling the same cold air, waiting for him to move again. This is where the first story begins. A story not about the forest itself, but about those who entered it believing they were alone. A family on a weekend trip. A pair of friends seeking a night away from the noise of the city. A wanderer testing the limits of his endurance. Each of them would discover that there are presences in the woods that are not recorded on maps. Presences that cannot be measured by distance or compass. They did not come to harm anyone, perhaps. They did not need to. The forest itself was the harm. It is not the kind of danger that reveals itself immediately. It does not scream. It does not charge out from behind trees. It is the danger that grows in silence, step by step, until a person realizes too late that they are no longer alone. They feel the pressure of eyes they cannot see. They hear breathing that does not come from their chest. They sense the weight of something that belongs to the land, not to them, and that does not intend to release them once they have crossed a line they never noticed. Those who returned spoke little, and what they said was whispered. They spoke of an overwhelming dread, of nights where no one in the camp could sleep, of shadows that seemed to multiply as the fire burned lower. They spoke of the way the forest swallowed sound, so that their voices seemed thin, small, already lost before they had left their mouths. A child in one family asked a question her parents could not answer. Why does the forest not want us here? The answer to that question is never given. It is not the duty of the forest to explain. It is not the duty of the trees to reveal what they shelter. The living may leave it, but they cannot change it. The forest remains what it has always been. Vast, silent, patient. and filled with more than bark and leaves. And when people walk into it with the belief that the only dangers are hunger, storms, or wild animals, the forest waits. It waits until they hear the first footstep that does not belong to them. It waits until they look behind themselves with fear tightening their chest. It waits until they realize that they have crossed into something much older, much colder, and far more watchful than they imagined. So the question lingers like smoke. What follows people into the woods when they believe they are alone? And more importantly, what never lets them leave? The forest has always stood as a border between what is known and what resists explanation. For centuries, people have been drawn to it, compelled by its silence, its endlessness, and the deceptive promise of solitude. Campers and hikers step beneath its canopy, believing they are entering a place of retreat. But history tells a darker story. Communities that grew near great forests learned quickly to respect their boundaries. Some spoke of the trees as guardians of secrets. Others whispered that the woods were alive in ways humans could not understand, watching with patience that stretched far beyond lifetimes. In remote towns where forests press against the edge of homes, children were once warned never to linger after dusk, not because of wolves or bears, but because of the woods themselves. Elders would describe how people disappeared, how voices were swallowed, how the darkness inside the trees never matched the darkness of the open sky. They said the air grew heavier as one stepped deeper in, that the silence became a weight pressing on the ears until the mind began to fray. It was advice passed down like an heirloom. The forest is not yours, so do not treat it as if it is. The modern age erased many of these warnings. New generations sought challenge, not caution. Hiking trails became marked with cheerful signs. Campgrounds lined with numbered posts. Families drove out in the summer to pitch tents, light fires, and fall asleep beneath towering silhouettes. Young adults hiked in search of photographs, experiences, moments to carry back into the noise of the city. They did not listen to the echoes of the past. They did not believe that the trees might hold on to something more than shadow. They believed that danger could be charted and measured, contained by maps and regulations. But no map has ever captured what waits beyond the trail. One story begins in a northern range where forests stretch without interruption for miles. A group of friends arrived on a cool autumn afternoon. They were experienced enough to walk with confidence, though not seasoned enough to truly know what silence could mean. They set their tents near a clearing, a place where the ground seemed soft, where the trees curved away as if offering space. They laughed by the fire that night, telling themselves the woods were nothing but a backdrop. Their voices carried upward, breaking against branches that did not echo back. When the fire sank to embers, they felt the forest close in. Another story unfolds farther west, where a family decided to camp for only one night. The father wanted his children to see the stars without interference from streetlights. The mother wanted to breathe air untouched by exhaust. They set their tent, cooked their food, and told stories as dusk slid into night. But in that quiet hour, the children grew uneasy. They said they heard something circling, footsteps moving just outside the glow of the lantern. The parents dismissed it as deer or wind, but the children grew restless, their eyes fixed on the line where shadows began. They said the forest was listening. In both stories and in countless others, there was no initial violence, no sudden terror. The dread came slowly, as if the forest itself was introducing them to something they had not yet understood. A stillness too absolute, a coldness that seemed to sink from the trees into their skin. Small signs first, objects misplaced, the faint sound of branches breaking where no one walked. Campsites found with belongings scattered or perfectly arranged as if untouched, while their owners never returned. The history of these places is layered with reports. Old newspaper clippings speak of men who vanished during logging seasons, of search parties that walked in circles until they abandoned hope. Some stories mention women who wandered into the woods and were found months later in clearings, alive but unable to speak of what they saw. The words never formed on their lips, as if whatever they encountered remained lodged inside them unshareable. Rangers who patrol these regions rarely speak openly, but in private they mention camps that they avoid, valleys where compasses fail, places where they feel watched long before they see anyone. To outsiders, forests are landscapes. To those who live near them, they are thresholds. The people who grow up beside them know when the air shifts, when the silence is too heavy, when to turn back even if the path still stretches forward. They do not laugh at the stories. They do not ask why someone would walk away from a fire in the middle of the night and never return. They already know that the forest is not concerned with human reasoning. There is weight in these stories because they repeat across time and distance. Families vanish on weekends. Wanderers disappear during casual hikes. Groups fracture in the night and are never seen again. Search efforts bring no resolution, only more questions. It is as though the forest has a memory of its own, one that records the presence of those who enter but keeps the ending for itself. The emotional stakes are simple and terrible. Those who walk into the forest believe they will return, that their footsteps will lead back out the same way they went in. Families expect laughter around fires, photographs taken in front of tents, tired but safe journeys back to their cars. Instead, some receive silence. Phones go unanswered, trails grow colder. Search maps are covered in marks where bodies should have been but were not. The forest does not return what it chooses to keep. And so the question grows, spreading quietly through the communities that live near these forests. What is it that lives in the silence? Is it the forest itself, vast and alive in ways that cannot be measured? Or is it something hidden within, something that has always been there, waiting for footsteps to cross an unseen boundary? The truth is never given clearly. It waits in the air, it lingers in the silence, and it seeps into the minds of those who come too close. Every generation leaves its stories, and every generation learns again that the forest has no need to explain itself. They arrived with laughter, as so many do. The forest seemed harmless under the afternoon light, its silence a kind of peace they believed they had come to find. The first hours were ordinary. Tents were raised, fires built, food prepared. The branches swayed lightly in the wind, and the sun slipped between the trunks in golden streams. It looked like safety, like retreat, but what makes the forest deceptive is not what it shows. It is what it withholds until night arrives. For the group of friends in the northern range, the first sign came with the setting sun. As shadows stretched, the forest changed its shape. Every tree seemed taller, every path unfamiliar. They had marked the way in with ribbons of bright cloth, but as they looked back, they found them missing. The father of the family to the west noticed the same absence. He had tied a strip of fabric to a branch to reassure the children they could follow it back. When he checked at dusk, the fabric was gone. He told himself the wind had torn it loose, but the branch was bare, smooth, as though it had never held anything. The unease deepened when small things began to shift. A cooking pot moved several feet from where it had been left. A flashlight placed inside a tent was discovered outside. Its batteries drained, though it had not been used. One of the children said they heard whispers near the tree line. Not words, but the cadence of speech. The rise and fall of voices speaking too softly to be understood. The parents told them it was only the wind, yet when the wind passed, the whispering continued for a few seconds more. The fire burned low that night, and the silence became sharper. A sound began behind them, the rhythm of steady footsteps. They turned together, but nothing was there. The sound stopped the moment they looked. Then it started again when they faced the fire. Each time they turned, it vanished. They sat in stillness, waiting, listening. It was as though the forest was breathing with them, inhaling when they inhaled, exhaling when they exhaled. The footsteps timed perfectly to the beating of their hearts. For the lone wanderer in another region, the first sign was not sound but absence. Birds that had filled the trees all afternoon vanished suddenly, leaving the canopy empty and hollow. The silence was too complete, unnatural. He continued on the trail, his compass steady, his map folded neatly in his pocket. But as he walked, the landmarks did not align. The stream that should have been to his left was gone. The ridge that should have appeared in the distance never rose. He followed the trail as faithfully as before, yet the forest bent around him, reshaping itself with every step. By the time the sun lowered, he could not say where he was. In each of these stories, the moment came when the ordinary shifted into something colder. The friends heard laughter echo in the dark, laughter that belonged to none of them. The family awoke to find the firewood stacked in a perfect tower, a shape that no one claimed to build. The wanderer woke in the middle of the night to see his compass needle spinning in circles, twitching as if caught in invisible hands. None of these moments had answers, and that is why they linger. The forest seemed to lean closer as the hours dragged on. Shapes appeared between the trees, too far to see clearly, too tall to be natural. When the lanterns swung toward them, they were gone. When the lanterns turned away, the shapes returned, waiting in the edges of vision. Shadows stretched in wrong directions, bending against the firelight, bending against the moon. The air felt thick like water pressing against skin. Every breath shallow and labored. Sleep became impossible. The friends whispered in their tents, afraid to speak loudly, convinced their voices were being carried deeper into the woods. The family sat awake with the lantern burning, watching the line of darkness just beyond its glow. The wanderer built a fire 3 times larger than needed, staring into it with eyes wide and unblinking. They did not want the dark to win, yet they felt it pressing closer with every hour. By dawn, exhaustion gave way to confusion. Tracks appeared around the campsite, bare footprints in the soil circling the tents. They belonged to no one in the group. The family found the same marks, small, almost childlike, yet spaced too far apart to belong to children. The wanderer discovered none, but that was worse. For him there were no footprints at all, not even his own. The ground was smooth, unbroken, as though he had never walked there at all. The deeper mystery was not in what was seen, but in what refused to be explained. A pot moved, a compass spun, a footprint appeared where no foot had stepped. These are not violent acts. They are not savage or brutal. They are precise, deliberate, and deeply personal. They suggest not randomness, but intention. Someone or something had been watching closely enough to interfere in the smallest of ways. Enough to unsettle, enough to fracture the line between safety and fear. And so the first cracks widened. Trust began to break. Friends questioned one another. Parents questioned themselves. The wanderer questioned his own mind. Was it exhaustion? Was it the silence? Or was it something woven into the forest itself? Something that did not want them there and made no effort to hide it? It was not yet violence, not yet disappearance. But it was the first taste of what would come. The slow and deliberate build of a mystery that would not allow them to leave whole. The forest had turned its gaze upon them, and once that gaze fixed itself, there was no way to walk out unchanged. The build-up is always the same. At first, the woods seem like a place to pass through, but then the trees begin to shift, the air grows heavy, and the silence begins to whisper. It does not rush. It does not need to. The forest has time, more than any human who dares to step inside it. And as the sun rose again, pale and cold, every one of them knew something had already gone wrong. In the days that followed each disappearance, others stepped forward to search, to investigate, to understand. But the forest gives only fragments, pieces scattered like bones, each one heavy with implication but never whole. It is within these fragments that the mystery grows deeper, not solved but sharpened. For the group of friends in the northern range, their campsite was discovered abandoned. Tents remained, but not as they had been left. The canvas was torn, but not from outside. Slashes ran down from the inside as though someone had tried to claw their way out. Sleeping bags lay flattened, unzipped, but no sign of struggle marked the soil. No boot prints leading away. No trace of food taken. In the ashes of the fire, searchers found logs stacked in a pattern, deliberate and unnatural, as though someone had arranged them with intention. Investigators photographed the site, circled anomalies, wrote down words like panic and unknown. But words are small against silence. The family's campsite held similar contradictions. Their belongings were untouched, neat as if they had been planning to return within minutes. Food sat sealed in containers, their car still locked, keys inside. But around the perimeter, investigators found the footprints again, small bare childlike impressions pressed into the soil. They circled the camp in uneven loops, some overlapping, some vanishing into grass that showed no disturbance. A ranger pressed his palm into one print and whispered that it was still warm, as if whatever had left it had walked there not long before. For the lone wanderer, the evidence came in fragments carried by others. His compass, discovered weeks later in the mud of a dried stream, still spun in erratic circles. His journal, recovered near a fallen tree, contained pages of confusion. He had written about hearing a second set of footsteps, about finding cairns, small stacks of stones that seemed to appear overnight along his path. The last entry trailed into unfinished words. The ink dragged across the page as though his hand had been pulled away mid-sentence. What unsettles the mind most is not what is found, but what does not align. Torn tents without footprints, footprints without bodies, belongings left in perfect order, as though their owners meant to return but never did. Reports conflict with one another. Some claim to hear laughter in the recordings of search efforts, faint but undeniable. Others dismiss it as interference. Dogs trained to track scents lose their trail within yards, circling in confusion, whimpering, refusing to move forward. Experts attempt explanations. Psychologists speak of shared delusions, mass panic within small groups. Survivalists suggest disorientation, hypothermia, irrational behavior caused by stress and fatigue. These answers sound rational on paper, yet they do not explain the precision of details. They do not explain how entire groups vanish in silence without a trace. They do not explain why tents are cut open from within, or why belongings are arranged in ways no panicked hand would take the time to do. Artifacts remain, and each artifact becomes a riddle. The stacked firewood at the friend's camp. Why arranged so carefully in a design no one admits to building? The family's footprints. Why small? Why barefoot? Why still warm when no children were missing? The wanderer's cairns. Who placed them? Who balanced stones in the night without sound, and why did they lead him deeper into regions where no path should have existed? Interviews with survivors add little clarity. A boy once returned after vanishing overnight near a trail. He was found seated at the edge of a clearing, unharmed, staring at the trees. When asked where he had been, he said only, "I followed the voice." No voice was found. Another woman, discovered days after disappearing from her group, refused to speak at all. Her eyes remained locked on the horizon, unblinking, as if she feared something would appear again if she moved. Months later, she spoke a single phrase to her sister. "They were behind me the whole time." She never explained further. Theories form, collapse, and reform again. Each clue contradicts the last. Investigators write their reports, seal their files, and close their cases. But the evidence does not allow closure. It lingers like the forest itself, dense, dark, and impossible to see through. What is left behind is never enough to explain, only enough to haunt. What is striking is how similar these fragments are across distance and decades. Campsites slashed from within. Footsteps that begin and end without reason. Belongings arranged deliberately, as though touched by unseen hands. Journals filled with growing paranoia, then cut short mid-sentence. None of these fragments align into a whole, yet together they create a pattern that cannot be dismissed. It is as though the forest leaves just enough behind to remind the living that something has happened, but never enough to tell them what. Some searchers refuse to speak of what they find. They leave the field, hand in their resignation, and settle in towns far from the tree line. When asked, they say only that the forest does not wish to be understood. A few speak of shadows they saw during their searches. Tall figures in the distance, always too far to identify, always vanishing the moment they were approached. Reports of these figures are dismissed, omitted from official records, whispered only between those who know what they saw. The deeper one looks, the more the evidence begins to feel less like scattered clues and more like a deliberate withholding. The forest gives just enough to be noticed, but never enough to be solved. Each torn tent, each misplaced object, each vanishing footprint feels less like chaos and more like a message. One written in a language the living have not learned to read, and so the analysis ends where it began, in silence. Objects, prints, journals, testimonies, pieces of a puzzle without a picture to guide them. The forest has scattered its fragments, but it has not offered its truth. Those who try to arrange the pieces find themselves staring into the same conclusion. There is something in those woods, something that sees, something that moves, something that waits. But it is not careless. It is not random. Every clue left behind feels as though it was chosen, as though it was meant to be found. And that is what makes it more unsettling than absence. The forest gives only what it wants the living to see. The aftermath of disappearance is never confined to the forest. It spills outward into homes, into towns, into the lives of families who wait for answers that never come. The forest does not simply take those who walk into it. It leaves behind a silence that grows inside the living, a silence that is heavier than grief, because it is a silence without end. For the family whose campsite was discovered intact, the days that followed were filled with a waiting that bordered on madness. Their relatives gathered in a small town hall near the edge of the wilderness, voices low, eyes raw from sleeplessness. Phones rang at odd hours, search coordinators calling with fragments of news, objects found, trails mapped, but never the faces they wanted to see. Hope flickered, but each time it died, it left behind something colder than despair. It left behind the knowledge that the forest was still holding its silence. One of the children's grandparents spoke aloud what the parents refused to admit. It is not a question of when they will come back. It is a question of what the forest is willing to release. The words hung in the air, unwelcome but undeniable. No one answered. They could not, because deep inside they had begun to sense it as well. The group of friends left their own trail of devastation. Their families struggled not only with absence but with contradictions. The torn tents, the arranged firewood, the footprints that did not belong, all of it tore holes in the possibility of closure. They were told to accept explanations that felt hollow, explanations that dismissed their children as panicked, irrational, overcome by wilderness. But when the parents closed their eyes at night, they imagined their sons and daughters running through the dark, chased not by animals or storms, but by something unseen. They dreamed of voices calling, voices swallowed before they reached another ear. They woke drenched in sweat, breathing fast, unable to shake the image of figures standing at the edge of the firelight watching. Communities felt the weight as well. In towns pressed against the forest edge, parents held their children closer. Some refused to allow them beyond the tree line. Trails once walked for leisure were abandoned. Campgrounds fell silent, their numbered posts rusting in the weather. It was not just grief that spread, but suspicion. People began to whisper that the forest was cursed, that it had grown hungry, that it had learned to take not one but many. The lone wanderer's disappearance struck differently. He had been known for his independence, his solitude. When his journal was found, filled with confusion and fear, it shattered the image his family held of him. They remembered a man who seemed unshakable, who walked into silence as if it belonged to him. But the pages showed something else: doubt, paranoia, despair. His sister wept when she read his words. She said she could feel the forest pressing against him even from the ink, as though it had seeped into his mind before it claimed his body. For survivors, the torment was worse. The boy who had followed the voice could not sleep without lights burning. Each time the darkness grew thick around him, he said he heard it again, faint coaxing, calling him back. He pressed his hands against his ears, but the voice slid through his bones. The woman who muttered about being followed deteriorated slowly, her speech fractured, her eyes dull. She withdrew from her family, sat for hours in silence, staring at walls as though they were trees. She never set foot outside again. The psychological impact did not end with the immediate victims. Searchers, too, carried it. Men who had walked miles through the undergrowth returned to their families pale, thin, changed. One confessed to his wife that he felt the forest behind him even in his home, that he woke at night certain that someone was standing at the foot of his bed. Another quit his post entirely, moved to a city hundreds of miles away, yet admitted in letters that he could not escape the feeling that the trees had followed him. It is easy to believe trauma belongs only to those directly touched, but the truth is broader. The forest became a shadow over entire communities. People stopped speaking openly about it. They spoke only in fragments, in whispers, as though saying too much might draw the gaze of whatever had already taken so many. Outsiders dismissed them as superstitious, but inside the towns no one laughed. They carried the silence like a sickness. The deeper wound came not from loss alone, but from uncertainty. Death can be grieved. A body can be buried. But absence without explanation carves something deeper. It carves paranoia. Questions that circle endlessly without rest. Families ask if their loved ones suffered. Communities ask if they were chosen. Survivors ask if it will come for them again. None of these questions receive answers. They are left to rot in the mind, to grow heavier with every passing year. It is in this way that the forest does more than take. It changes the living. It alters how they see the world, how they trust the silence, how they breathe when night comes. They live with eyes that dart toward shadows, with ears that strain for whispers. They inherit a fear that is not entirely theirs, but has been passed down by the absence of others. And always the same thought returns, whispered but never silenced. What did they see before the end? What stood in the trees that made them flee their tents, abandon their fires, leave journals unfinished? What presence pressed against their skin, cold and patient, until their last step vanished from the earth? The forest does not answer. It does not offer comfort. It only stands, vast and silent, waiting for the next set of footsteps to cross into its shadow, and those who remain live with the weight of knowing that silence can follow them too, long after they have turned away. The investigations began the same way they always do. Clipboards, maps spread across tables, coordinates marked with pins. Search teams traced the ground in steady lines. Men in reflective vests called out names into silence. Dogs pulled against their leashes. Helicopters hovered overhead, sending ripples through the trees as though trying to shake free answers. But the forest did not respond. It does not respond to command or demand. It only gives fragments and then waits. The official explanations came quickly. For the group of friends in the northern range, reports spoke of disorientation. Investigators said they had likely panicked, cut their tents in confusion, and wandered into the trees. For the family, the footprints were dismissed as animal tracks, though none could say which animal. For the lone wanderer, the erratic compass and journal entries were attributed to exhaustion, stress, and perhaps hallucination. These words filled the reports like plaster poured into cracks. They created the illusion of solidity, of closure, but those who read them closely knew better. Not all who investigated were convinced. A ranger who walked the site of the torn tents admitted privately that the slashes were too deliberate, too uniform. He had seen tents ripped by animals, torn by storms, and cut by human hands. None resembled what he saw there. The slashes looked like desperation, like people clawing against something that pressed in from outside but left no mark behind. Another ranger studying the footprints around the family's camp noted that the impressions were too defined, too clean. In the damp soil, human prints blur quickly, but these had edges sharp as though pressed with care, not walked into existence. They looked less like tracks and more like imprints. As evidence refused to align, theories multiplied. Some believed it was criminal. Hidden figures in the forest moving silently, stalking campsites, abducting the vulnerable. There are stories of hermits who vanish into the woods for decades, of fugitives who build shelters in valleys no one else dares to enter. Could such a presence have lived among the trees, taking those who stumbled too close? The idea was considered, even pursued, but no sign of human habitation was found. No shelters, no tools, no discarded remains of food or fire. Nothing. Others turned to nature. Wolves, bears, cougars, all given as explanations, but predators leave behind signs. They leave prints, broken branches, fur caught in bark, blood staining the soil. Here there was none of that. Tents slashed from within. Journals abandoned mid-sentence. Fires burning down on their own, not scattered by panic, but left to fade in silence. Predators take and leave chaos. What investigators found was order, the kind of order that unsettles because it implies control. Psychological theories soon followed. Panic, mass hysteria, hypothermia-induced delirium, in which victims strip off clothing and flee shelter in freezing air. But the weather had been mild, the nights cold but survivable. The groups experienced enough to handle it. If panic had claimed them, why were their belongings untouched, their paths erased, their absence so clean? Why had no trace been found beyond the campsites, as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole? When official theories cracked, the unofficial ones grew stronger. Locals whispered of the forest as a presence, not haunted, not cursed, but alive in a way people could not understand. They spoke of hearing voices between the trees, not in dreams but while awake. Some claimed to have seen figures tall and silent, watching from a distance but never stepping forward. Others described the forest as shifting itself, bending paths, rearranging landmarks. They said the woods led travelers deeper, as if guiding them toward a place where they would never return. One old man described the forest as a mouth that eats slowly. His words were dismissed by officials, but his neighbors listened carefully. They said he had seen too many vanish to believe in chance. His son had disappeared 20 years earlier, his nephew 5 years after that. He never entered the forest again. He said it was not an enemy to be fought, but a hunger to be avoided. Conspiracies grew as well. Some believed the government knew more than it admitted, that the files sealed away in archives told of patterns stretching back decades, even centuries. That the rangers who left their posts had seen something not meant for human eyes. That the silence around the disappearances was not ignorance, but control. They pointed to missing pages in reports, to photographs never released, to the hesitation in officials' voices during press conferences. And then there were the theories too dark to dismiss. That the forest itself is not passive, but active. That it does not simply shelter animals or trees, but contains something older, a presence that watches, a presence that takes. Not malicious in the human sense, not cruel, but indifferent. Indifferent to grief, indifferent to loss, indifferent to explanation. It takes because it can, because that is what it has always done. Each theory collides with another. None settle. Families are left with choices that do not comfort. believe their loved ones panicked, believe they were taken by criminals who vanished without trace, or believe they were claimed by something far beyond human understanding. None of these options offer peace. All of them leave questions raw and unanswered, and perhaps that is the cruelest part. Theories multiply, investigations circle endlessly, but the truth remains hidden. The forest does not reveal. It allows fragments to surface, but never the whole. It keeps its silence, and the silence is its power. Investigators close their files. Families keep their grief. Communities whisper. And the forest remains vast and unbroken, untouched by the theories of men. In the end, the question is not which theory is correct. The question is why the forest ensures that no theory can ever be proven. The forest does not answer. That is its most terrifying quality. It accepts the questions poured into it, the desperate shouts of search parties, the whispered pleas of parents, the unspoken fears of survivors, but it never replies. It only stands in silence, ancient and patient, as if it knows time belongs to it, not to those who walk beneath its canopy. For centuries, people have sought comfort and resolution. A body recovered, a crime explained, a death understood. Even the most tragic truth provides something to hold on to, something to bury, something to mark with a stone. But the forest denies that comfort. It leaves behind fragments without pattern, pieces without a whole, trails that lead nowhere. It demands that the living endure a silence that stretches not for days or weeks, but for lifetimes. Generations pass, yet the stories remain. Families grow old without answers. Communities change, but the shadows on the tree line do not. The forest waits, still and unbroken. It holds memories in ways human minds cannot. It remembers the footsteps that entered, remembers the voices that cried out, remembers the final flickers of light from fires that have long gone cold, and it remembers the silence that followed. What unsettles is not only the disappearances themselves, but the way they echo across time. Every new vanishing is layered on the last, another voice added to a chorus of unanswered questions. Each time the search begins, the theories circulate, the grief spreads outward like ripples in water. And each time the forest remains untouched, unbothered, unmoved. It is a cycle that repeats without end. The living search, the forest waits, and silence wins. What if the forest is more than landscape? What if it is a boundary, a threshold, a place where the laws of the known world dissolve? Some suggest it is ancient ground, older than memory, older than human presence, that it is not cursed but simply other, that those who vanish within it do not die in the way we understand death. They cross into something else, taken into a silence that does not release. It is a thought that lingers in the mind long after the stories fade. If the forest can erase footsteps, if it can silence voices, if it can rewrite paths and swallow entire groups without trace, then perhaps it is not bound to time in the way we are. Perhaps those who vanish are not gone but held in a stillness we cannot see, in a silence that exists just beyond perception. Perhaps they are still there, eyes open, breath caught, waiting in the darkness between the trees. The forest reveals itself only through absence. That is its signature. It does not scream. It does not mark itself with fire or blood. It simply takes, and in taking, it creates an emptiness that cannot be filled. That emptiness spreads. It spreads through families, through communities, through every mind that dares to walk the trails afterward. It spreads into the imagination, where footsteps echo, where whispers creep, where shadows lengthen even in daylight. It is not the kind of fear that passes when the sun rises. It is not the fear of predators or storms. It is a deeper fear, the fear of being erased without explanation, of being taken not by accident or violence, but by something that offers no reason. A fear that nothing, not prayer, not science, not vigilance, can protect against, and so the stories endure, not as warnings that prevent others from entering, but as shadows that follow them in. Every hiker who laces their boots, every family that drives out to pitch their tent, every wanderer who shoulders a pack feels the weight of those who never returned. They walk into the forest not alone, but with ghosts pressing close behind, unseen but undeniable. The question that remains is not whether the forest will claim again. It will. The question is who and when. The question is how many more families will sit in silence. How many more journals will end mid-sentence. How many more fires will burn down without a body to warm them. And as long as the forest stands, the questions will not stop. What follows us into the trees when we believe we are alone? What whispers just beyond hearing? What waits in the silence, watching patient, endless? The forest does not answer. It never will. And that is why it haunts.